Hello again, this is Frantz Kantor here, cartoonist, illustrator, toon talker, and I'm doing a caricature again today, and I've done a little thumbnail, and the subject of the caricature today, I'm just working out simplifying the shapes, right? Because I'm doing a caricature, and my take on caricature is very simple. It's to do with simplification and simplification and exaggeration. So using both principles of exaggerating the shapes, simplifying the shapes, in order to get a impression of the person. I've actually done this quite simple. So it's like a plectrum shape, or this sort of a narrow-ended oval, right, to get the concept of the broad impression of the shapes of the head. And anyway, we'll go into the physicality and the construction method in a second. So just to tell you who I'm doing, it's J. Robert Oppenheimer is the father of the atom bomb. And this is him, very complex man, very interesting. I was a very big fan of J. Robert Oppenheimer because he personifies the arms race in many ways, because he invented the atom bomb. He led the Project Manhattan, which created the atom bomb and ended the war with Japan. This is the photograph that we're going to be referencing. It's a little bit blurry, but it's okay because I know a little bit about anatomy, so I'm able to sort of read into the blurred lines a little bit and infer detail. Doesn't look very happy here, does he? Well, he kind of became very depressed about the effects, because originally all of the scientists were under the impression that they were creating a deterrent to stop the war, like to force Japan and maybe a belligerent Russia into his ceasing hostilities or the threat of hostilities. I think no one was more upset by the fact that all the scientists were very upset by the fact that they used this weapon that they tested in I think, where was it? I can't remember where it was, but Project Trinity or Project Manhattan was the actual project that created the maths for the project, for the atom bomb. Very complex man, because he really he took it quite personally, and also he was a victim of the McCarthy era, trying to infer that everybody that doesn't like a stronger America or an atomic age America is a communist. So really suffered from that. So his reputation was they tried several times to destroy him, but he's very famous in the sense that he led the atomic bomb project. So he was sort of like the spearhead or the father of the atomic age in many ways, and and that's quite a big title to put on somebody, a big burden, an emotional burden. But you could see that this burden didn't sit well in his face. So he was sort of like harboring a lot of guilt and depression and sorrow for the atomic age that he spearheaded and helped bring about. Very brilliant mind, but again very tortured, and you can see that the lines in his face just sort of speak about the the crushing blow to his humanity that he suffered as a result of fulfilling his ambitions. So that's the subject. That's what we're going to do. I find him a very intriguing person. And let's delve into it. So what I've done is I've done a thumbnail sketch, and I've transferred the thumbnail sketch, very, very quickly, editing as I went to get a little bit of dynamic proportion and dynamic composition onto the toned paper. And this, of course, is like Strathmore. Strathmore is like a 300 GSM card type of paper. It's like a pastel paper. And that's kind of, that's a nice sort of medium to use instead of white paper, because we're going to try to create a sculptural effect using brown pencil. This is Terracotta Prismacolor, and a black pencil. This is a Faber-Castell Polychromo, and another Prismacolor, which is the white. As well as that, we've got some heavy hitting devices here, some tools. We have a Posca white marker in a couple of different sizes. Right, so that's opaque. That's going to help with the white. And helping along with the black, we'll just use a black brush. Okay, so we've got pencils in different sizes. Of course, they get very worn. And when they get worn like that, you can't grip them. So you got to use a grip, an artificial grip like this, which is pretty cool, right? Extends the life of the pencil, because these suckers are about $3. They're not cheap. All right, let's go. Let's do this. So you might be well asking, why are you so fascinated in this person? My answer would be that I look at faces and I study what the faces mean, what the faces are telling me. And this person, J Oppenheimer, his face tells me an awful lot. Ooh, I've just changed the proportion of the ears. I have to be careful about that. Let's go back to the sketch and the thumbnail and try to re-establish that relationship. Caricatures explode proportions, okay? So a lot of the features that you see that are big for, maybe comic reasons perhaps, but they serve a purpose in composition because they tend to balance things. So I could give you a whole graphic design lesson in balancing elements, but basically it's to do. There's a lot of things involved in this. One is the establishment of a finite region, an area which you're going to work, which I've done that with this sort of a framing device, okay? So the framing device gives you positive space and negative space. And the idea is to balance positive space and negative space, very, very much like the yin and yang symbol, but down, okay? So that creates a sense of balance in composition. You can, like a window, have the object break the borders to create something dynamic and three-dimensional, like it's coming at you. So all of these things, if you blur your eyes, blur your vision, these reduce into simple forms, very simple shapes. Okay, so I mean really simple shapes, like triangles and squares and circles. That's sort of simplicity. That's the level of simplicity that you're looking at. You're arranging graphic elements, okay? This is the process of simplification. So you look for those things that give you a simple version, a simple direct shape in order to express the composition or the rough idea of the content of the object. And then you exaggerate the details. So a lot of the details here are referenced within the face and obviously within the face, but within a certain area of the face, which I kind of call the mask or the T-zone. And this T-zone, so-called T-zone, has the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. So the relationship between these elements constantly as you draw, it's very important to think of and reference everything. So when you do a big nose, reference it in relation to the eyes. I'll explain more as we go, because there's a nose here which I've expanded, and that affects the proportions and the perspective of the eye on that right side of the drawing. Okay? So we're going to talk more about this as we go, but let's get into the details. So I've got the broad shapes here, and now I drew very lightly. Okay, so I drew lightly because I can erase back to a certain degree, not all the way back to the paper, because this is pigment after all. It's not graphite. It's not as slippery as a graphite pencil. But it has some advantages that graphite doesn't have, in that it's a warm tone. So I'm trying to sort of give a impression of humanity with the drawing. So the warm pencil, the warm tone, kind of looks like I'm drawing something living. And that helps with the feeling. When you look at, it helps with the believability of the drawing, okay? You are drawing, after all, a human being. And that's important always to remember that. Okay, so I've got some possibilities of nice, intricate shapes coming in in the ear, which is nice. And now I'm going to concentrate on building up the relationship with the rest of the face. It's a lot of things to consider, like bone structure, which refer back to the skeleton underneath the skull of the subject. You're constantly thinking in terms of light and dark. So if you go here, let's go, we'll make a new one. So if you go back to the simple shape of the head, right, there's a strong light coming in from the right-hand side with the photograph, as you can see, which means that the left-hand side of the image should be in shadow. However, there's a fill light coming in from that side, which is making it less severe. So there is a little bit of directional shadows, which is important to think about when you're drawing, okay? And there's also a little bit of a chance of lightening up those shadows so that they're not severe. We're not, after all, creating a film noir effect of over-dramatic lighting, right? We're trying to temper it a little bit. There's lots of lovely, intricate little line directions in here. And even though his face is quite blurry, I have to move the thing down because it tends to crop because it's a very vertical photograph. So even though it's blurry, I can see quite a lot, and I'm going to take a guess as to the relevant details and what they mean as I go along. Okay, cool. So I've got like a nice overall structure which I've managed to eke out here, and what I'm doing now is just giving a direction of the hair, what little hair he has, but it's very important to think about what you're drawing while you're drawing it. I know that sounds silly, but the fact is I'm drawing hair, so I'm drawing hairs. I'm imagining combing the hairs on his head, right? So it's trying to be tactile a little bit, with reference to the textures of the object that you're drawing, the part that you're drawing. So I'm just putting in, trying to get a handle on the details now. There's some lovely strokes, pencil strokes that I can capture, or hair strokes, hairlines, lines in the eyebrows that I can capture with a pencil by pretending to be a comb and combing these hairs. And it gives it a very sort of characteristic truth in that I'm referring to what I'm seeing, right? But I am reacting to it in a very particular way. So to give more meaning and more detail to the story of this drawing, the story of Robert Oppenheimer's face, his caricature. So it's I like to. It's more of like a contemplative process of finding relationships and building organically building a narrative that makes sense. So that just means, when you look at things, don't sort of assume that they're what you think. Just look at the reference and respond more not accurately, but appropriately. Okay? So why did I just correct myself then? Because you're actually using a little bit of symbol making, okay? A little bit of cartooning involved in the dynamic appropriation of elements, symbols and shapes and things like that. So there is a little bit of that dramatic oversimplification that cartoons can afford you, because they're able to bend a lot of things, bend shapes to fit the idea of the subject. So rather than being a slave to the portrait, you make the portrait a slave to the concept, to the idea that you're coming up with, which is basically entertaining yourself in an interesting way. It's very what's the word I'm looking at? It's not a democracy. You're not creating a likeness for the sake of creating a likeness. It's not a portrait, and there's no method other than individual study of the shapes and the lines that you're seeing, and reacting appropriately. How important are they to the overall face, both in terms of the recognition, but also the it's very interesting lines here. So also the recognition, but also structurally, is it true to your understanding of perspective and anatomy, things like that. So there's a lot of things really going on in your head that you're responding to. It's not a simple case of of a process that is precise. There's no precision here. It's discovery. Something could go wrong. You may not get the likeness you want, right? But it's an exploration. So that's the thing that invites you to continue on. Because if you knew how it was going, what's the point? If you knew how it would end, what's the point in the journey? You're not going to learn anything by it. You're just going to, be smug and vindicate your original idea. No, I don't want to. I like the idea that anything can happen. I like the idea that it may not work. He's got very pale eyes, by the way, but it's not showing up in the photograph. So I might need to be careful about how I play this in the drawing, in the caricature. So caricatures are, they're based on impressions of what you see, and it's very organic. It's a process of investigation. You're looking at lines and things and what they mean. So as well as getting an impression of the likeness, right? It's also a matter of study and conviction. So the conviction is like based on the interpretation of these lines and what they mean. What they mean in a readable sense. So that could be expression, that could be the expression itself of the character, right? Does the character look like he's thinking about something? What could that thought be? You know, is that a big thought? Is that a happy thought, a sad thought? What is it? What is the implications of that expression? So these are things that, they're not things that you think one at a time. It's not a shopping list. It's a method of analysis that you pick up over time. It just occurs to you. This is why I like caricature, because caricature is something very personal and very unique in the process of investigating a story of somebody's face. So there's the narrative that you pick up from learning about the issue, about the person, about who they are. It's like a biography in a way. There's also the unspoken narrative of the feelings that you get from the drawing. So, and that's a very difficult thing to quantify, because a lot of people don't think about, they do think, but they kind of suppress it. They don't really focus on the implications of the subject of these lines. You're creating lines that create a narrative that tell you a story about somebody. That's what a caricature is, right? So I'm changing the rules. I'm entertaining myself in terms of making it a sense of play, a game, a puzzle, if you will, right? So remember how special you are when you draw. And if you start to change and build on what you know, you create a very different dialogue with the pencil. The pencil's talking, okay? So you're thinking about these things. What does this expression mean? This man who created the atom bomb, the father of the atom bomb. What does this expression mean? Is he happy? Is he sad? Is he melancholy? Melancholy is a term that people describe somewhat theatrically to rob it of meaning, but basically it's a sort of a sweet and sour. It's a sweet sadness, so it's like a gentle sadness. So I'm looking at these things and thinking, this man has kind of paid the ultimate sacrifice for his belief in himself. He created the ultimate monster, the Frankenstein monster. This is Dr. Frankenstein, and he created the monster. So I love monster films because of what stories they tell. They're so imaginative. They teach us something. They're like Aesop's fables in a way. They teach us weird, simplistic morals perhaps. But basically, he paid the price. This guy Oppenheimer paid the price for his knowledge. So he's famously said, he quoted the Bhagavad Gita in an interview, one of his last interviews, and the quote was, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." So it kind of gives you, it's heavy, right? That's pretty heavy. But remember, this is the father of the atom bomb, okay? So, and kind of like embodies the whole principle of the tortured scientist in a way. How, I suppose you have ideas of tortured artists and tortured poets and tortured this and tortured that, tortured by their ideas. So, his ideas came true. His theories about the atomic bomb came true. It came true. So he was vindicated in a way that few people are in their careers, in their life. But that very vindication created this incredible feeling of guilt. you know. This is quite an important thing. This is not like something small. He created an atom bomb. This is the power of the sun, right? Ultimately. So to do that is not a small thing. And you know, and really how we think about that is key to how we kind of respond to him. So it's like he's sort of like painted as a villain, but vilified because of delving into that power, I guess, and you know, that's why people sort of, I think, feel a little bit funny towards him. You know, it's like, okay, well, he's a genius, he's a clever dude, but he's the father of the atom bomb. So it's like, you know, difficult subject, isn't it? Really, and that's what I kind of like about it. It's that very duality of thought, of feeling, you know, of being uncomfortable with the subject. When you think about it in its true form, right? He created something that probably, obviously shouldn't have done, and I think bitterly regretted it, and was vilified in many ways because of that. And the fact that, you know, he lived in an era, the McCarthy era, that also punished people with doubts. So if you doubted, you're not a patriot. You doubted the right of America to have the atomic bomb. You doubt that? Oh, well, you're not a patriot. Then you must be a communist. So it's like you're either this or you're either that. There's nothing in between. You can't be a tortured soul regretting the creation of the monster. Now the monster's loose, and the patriots are saying, you know, well, this is a good thing, but you know the true nature of the beast. You know the true nature of the Frankenstein monster, and you can't really. You created it, so you know people look at you funny if you say, "Well, I'm sorry, I created it." You're sorry you created it, but you created it. You're the father of the atomic bomb. And all that implies. So hands are, believe it or not, people are very scared. Well, I know you believe it. You believe anything. But hands are very scary for people to draw, right? And the funny thing about this thing is you should never be afraid, never be afeared of something, because your mind just makes up these blocks and they don't really mean anything. You know, hands are nothing. Hands are complicated, so are faces. You know, so the way that you approach to drawing subjects that scare you is to draw them, make fun of them in a way. So caricature or cartoon is a good way of simplifying the beast, belling the beast, so that you're no longer feared. Why isn't this working? What's going on here? Oh, okay. I get it. We'll simplify that. It's a little bit complicated, that sleeve. Okay, so that's for the brown pencil. Now let's get into some details over here. We're going to sort of zoom in. As blurry as this photograph is, we're going to try to get some sense out of it. Before I do that, let's see if I can establish some reflections, just to give us a point of contrast and where the contrast is going to come from in order to help set the dramatic elements of the three-dimensional properties of the drawing. Okay. So these little highlights at the eyelid, the bottom of the eyelid, is just really to help establish the glittery nature of the subject of the eyes. Okay, so basically eyes, you have to be careful about drawing whites, so-called, of the eyes. Be very careful, because that tends to oversimplify the object, oversimplify the eye, without really thinking about how that eye actually is. So you're basically turning the eye into a symbol of an eye rather than something that has reflective properties. And it's really, you need to look at the reference and think about what you're doing, because oftentimes, you know, it's not a simple process. It's not a simple thing. You need, it's got more individual definition, more individual qualities than an eye per se. Okay? So think about what the light's saying to you. Think about the anatomy of the eye. You know, the eyelid, how it folds over the eyeball. The eyeball itself is a spherical object. Don't paint the white of the eyes white. Be very careful, because that tends to really simplify the face a little bit too much. It's a bit sort of oversimplified, and you don't want to sort of do that, do you? So cartoons are a way of creating a simplification, like graphic design in a way. It simplifies. How about that for English? It simplifies. It simplifies the message, the graphic message, the communication. The communication is, what this is. It's a head. It's a human, and then it's a recognizable likeness of somebody, and the proportions are changed. So there is often a humorous aspect to caricatures. You know, people think, ha ha ha, you made my nose big. But really, I like the idea of just taking that process of exaggeration into another layer of exploration. So rather than just simply expanding shapes of exaggerating shapes, like make his nose big, make his ears big, this sort of thing, right? Think about how much more it can teach you about the face, about the expression, for example. You know, when you're putting down lines that are recognizable, these are references to obviously the person that you're drawing, but broadly than that, what do these lines actually tell you? You're drawing an expression, someone's thoughts, which are expressed in the lines and the pose of their face. Okay, the pose of their face, the lines, the wrinkles, the forms that are pushing and pulling all of the muscles around the face. It's important to reference these and think about them while you're drawing them. Okay, so I've concentrated a little bit on the modelling, the three-dimensional modelling of his eyes. As I said to you before, in the photographs, Just go back to see. His eyes are quite light, so it's a light blue. That's not him. It's Einstein. So let's have a look. So it's a pale grey blue, right? So that's something that we need to think about when we're working on the eyes, because the photograph tends to lie a little bit. So we're going to have to read into the anatomy, and we're thinking about light and how it describes, the eye and the iris. And even though the photograph says it's black, don't you believe it? It's got a little bit of shine coming here, so I'm not sure whether I'm getting the right. It's a little bit of reflection coming up from the spotlight here, so I'm not sure whether I'm getting enough pupil, because the pupil's very key in an eye. It holds a lot of meaning for us as humans, because you ever heard of the expression "the look of love," right? Pupils dilate, or when somebody's in shock or scared. Pupils dilate when someone's scared. For example, let's have a quick little look here. Do an eye, do an iris, do a pupil. Right. So that's like a normal pupil, and it's shadowed, the eyeball's shadowed by the layer of skin over the top. Yeah? Well, in a normal circumstances, the pupil is like a normal size, right? But if the subject is in low light, of course you let in more light. Or if the subject is in love or something like that, or drugged out, then you expand the pupils. Okay. The opposite is true, of course, for somebody who is scared, because if they're scared, then the pupils dilate. And also, if there's a lot of light, you tend to have dilated pupils, because it's sort of cutting out the amount of light that's getting into the eye. So that's giving you more of a contrasty view of the world. Okay, so here we go. I'm slowed down a little bit because I'm zeroing in on the eye structure, and even though the photograph doesn't show me very much detail about the structure itself, I am looking back and forth to get permission to make these changes from the photograph. Okay, so I don't want to reconstruct the eye. I just want to put in the correct amount of detail, given that this is something that I'm detecting from the reference. It's not really overstated. It's not as clear cut as everything else. So some of these elements are in shadow, and I have to, of course, try and get this curl happening in some of these hairs at the back of the eyebrow, which are very, very beautiful shape. So pencil lines are handy for drawing hair. They're handy for drawing fur, and at a pinch they're handy for drawing skin. So what I'm doing is a series of like cross hatches, which get more and more closed, so gradually creating more and more tone. Okay, so it's a sculptural drawing in 3 colored pencils: black, brown, terracotta, I think, or sienna brown, and white pencil. And it's a sculpture that I'm trying to get. I'm trying to get this feeling of a sculpture. So I'm looking at all of these things in the reference, and I'm responding, hopefully, appropriately, so that I can get somewhat of a likeness, but also, an impression of form, of how form works. So form is a 3-dimensional rendition of the subject, of the object. Okay, so there's some little broken, tiny haircut hairs down here, and some nice wayward hairs over there, because he is a scientist after all. I want to try and do Einstein tomorrow. That's what that photograph's for. So I want to try and do subjects that, are not necessarily featured quite a lot. I love finding things out, and I hope you guys do too. That's why a lot of times you say, well, who's that? I don't even know who that is. Doesn't matter. Now you know. So I'm exploring, and I enjoy the process of learning new things about somebody, and certainly I've been dying to draw J Oppenheimer for many, many years, and because I think he's just an interesting subject. That's all. It's just that he's an interesting subject. I like subjects that are either challenging as a drawing or, as a personality, to try to understand their wrinkles, understand the muscles and the forms that I'm drawing, and what do they mean? What do these mean, This is a little bit frustrating, isn't it, with my hand crossing over? You can't see the actual drawing. But it's necessary in order to do the task. Might be easier to do it in Procreate or Photoshop or something. We can just see the little dot running around the page. But you know what? It's kind of, I like this sort of bounciness of pushing the paper, and sort of, the tactile feel of the physicality of the drawing itself, the drawing process itself. It's kind of fun, and I always enjoy that aspect of it. It's a physical it's a physical process, very physical. Let's get physical. Olivia. So just look at the shadows and how relevant they are to the form, right? To create a sense of correct drama, sense of drama in the light and shade of the shapes that you're creating. Everything you look at in terms of its relevance, its accuracy, I guess. The proportions you're changing a lot, but the narrative is still there. So it's the recognizable parts that you're considering. You're focusing on recognizable parts, even though you're changing their position somewhat. Okay, so there's a lot of shapes here. getting there. When you're working with the black pencil, just go a bit easy because it's not red. It's not this brown, okay? So, it's better if you put it against the grey paper. It changes the warmth of the skin tones. So a lot of this stuff is based on, like you're drawing, skin. You're drawing a warm, living animal, a human being, okay? So the textures that you're putting in have a color. And this is kind of like how Da Vinci would have drawn the Mona Lisa before he painted it. So he could actually paint then the Mona Lisa at his leisure because he's studied the warmth of the skin tones and done a pencil study or studies that explain the warmth of the skin tones. So it's not just the likeness, it's the other cues, other things that we respond to, because skin is tactile, and it's a very important thing to remember that, So in a way you're kind of touching these forms with your pencil. So that's another reason why it's always good to occasionally do this outside of a computer, because computers, they try to mimic a lot of the tactile qualities. They might give you a sound effect or something like that, but ultimately it's this physical struggle with the materials, with the paper and the pencil, that give you a more reactive response. So I'm not saying favor one over the other. I'm just saying mix it up. Why not? Photoshop is just a tool after all. So, pick up a different tool. Why not? And have at it. Give it a go. Why not? Some lot of beautiful things that technology give us and make our lives, very comfortable. Especially as artists, it's like having a whole art shop in a box, and it can be very exciting, with the world of possibilities. And you can draw and make a masterpiece on the toilet if you want to, but probably shouldn't say that. I'll give you ideas. Get out of the toilet. Why are you in there for so long? I'm creating a masterpiece. So the drama of the light and dark, the contrast, right? Looking at modeling, three-dimensional modeling of form, okay? To create a sense of reality, a sense of truth. Maybe a sense of truth as well, but truth, I think, is probably more in the fact that you're getting these all of these lines in the face that have some kind of relevance and some kind of meaning to the story of the person. Everything is quite complex in many ways, and so story is implications of lines and wrinkles and things. They mean certain things, and worry lines and expressions. He's a very sensitive person. You can see that from the lines here. He's a very much in his head, right? So his imagination. You have to have imagination for this to be done. For science. Science is all about taking the imagination and that imaginative spark, which is aligned to creativity, I guess, creating life, creating death, creating a new world, and taking those ideas and proving them, which is probably one of the most satisfying, could be one of the most satisfying things of a man's career, a man's life. Sort of take your ideas and prove them to be true. But, of course, double-edged sword, right? The creature itself has other ideas. So the creature that Oppenheimer created had other ideas for its purpose. Its purpose may have been initially to prove the theory right, and then to maybe use it as a deterrent against other forces, but ultimately the creature had other ideas and created its own purpose. So that's the dilemma, isn't it, for the creator, the creative mind. If the idea benefits mankind, which you would hope it would, and then of course that concept is destroyed by the creature's own will and concept of its purpose. So I'm talking about the atom bomb as if it was a creature, but so it's like a Frankenstein story, a Frankenstein analogy, if you will. How the creature gets away from its creator, and the creator suffers guilt, like in the story of Frankenstein. Same thing. And the creator regrets giving life to the creature, which is a little bit late. So that's a kind of a very complex tale, very complex man. And in many ways that's reflected in his lines, in his face. So the black pencil helps create a hierarchy of tone between the light and the dark. Okay, so there's always a possibility of helping out these little forms here, even though they're not near the face itself. I'm just trying to give them a little bit of detail. So I don't want to give them too much relevance, too much detail, but just a little bit to help with their three-dimensional qualities. Also, a sense of drama, hierarchy of tone is great in the drawing process. Says, remember, it's not just a matter of outlines, but trying to cope with the shapes themselves, the forms of three-dimensional forms. There's some light there, put some light there, put some light there. That'll do. Should be fine. Get in with some... I forgot the ear, didn't I? So I'm putting in areas of highlight which represent shine. Of course, skin is a multi-faceted organ. It's full of different textures. Some are matte, some are shiny, depending on different factors. But think about the textures themselves rather than just the isolating elements of features and names of features. If you think about the properties of each, it gives you a better understanding for the drawing, so that you're not symbolizing too much. You're using a controlled method of symbol. Okay, so I'm going to build up some more contrast here and there, I think, to... Actually, you know what I might do is use a thicker... I might use a thicker pen. Let's go this one. So I'm putting in this light at the side, at the very edge, which is kind of bleaching out a lot of the features. And gives it a little bit too much contrast, perhaps, in certain areas. I think overall it's giving me a good effect. Yeah, so very interesting subject. The father of the atom bomb. So, most people tend to focus on on Albert Einstein in the era, but really he was absolutely aghast at the use of the atomic bomb for ending the war, and it ended the war. And a lot of people think, well, we had no choice and things like that. And there's certainly a point to that, but you can't deny the implications overall are phenomenal. It's like it's it propelled us into a nuclear age, and whether we liked it or not, it's sort of changed a lot of things. And created its own sense of dread, with the Cold War and etc. And there's some great films that hype up that feeling of dread that was created by him. He did it. Didn't mean to do it, just did it. So, yeah, get a little rim light happening down here. These are just little tiny elements that I want to capture. There's another thing here I wanted to put in, which is this zone here, which is going a little bit pinky, unfortunately, because of the brown pigment underneath. Okay, well, how about putting a little bit of a shine over there, maybe a little bit of an opposite shine over there. Yeah, that kind of works. That'll. I'm happy with that. The other thing I'll do, I'll destroy the nib. I'll use a thicker pen, and I'll try and build up a contrasting element of tone within the negative space. So the negative space is delineated by this framing device, which kind of captures the face, the shape, the character, right? And he kind of pops out of the frame itself, creating an impression by virtue of overlapping shapes, creates an impression of three-dimensional properties, which is the intention, let's face it, of the drawing. And I've created a sense of what I've been trying to do, what I try to do with a caricature is the same time as I'm focusing on the likeness, right, to create a sense of believable likeness to the subject, but also trying to think about the expressions and think of a narrative undertone for the caricature. You know, so if there's a hint of a smile, I might play with that and extend it. If there's a frown or a worry line or something, I might extend that. I might see that and then exaggerate it. So this is the thing with caricature. It's quite organic in that there is more than the process. There's more to the art of caricature than you think. So it's not like a process of steps 1, 2, 3, right? It can be quite an experience for the artist. There's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of exploration happening here and thinking about the implications of these lines that you're drawing. What do they actually infer? What's the meaning of these lines in the narrative of the person that you're drawing? Yeah. So that, in many ways, is why I like to take my time with caricatures. I hope that doesn't disturb you too much, but I like this process. I enjoy the process of creating a likeness and also creating a story. I enjoy the process of telling a story. So I'll use a thicker pen. Let's try and get his name in here, and J. Robert. And there's a long name. Oppenheimer. Okay. He's got a lot of. I could come into the room and help this out. I can't really tell whether this is because there's a lot of reflection coming in from the angle of the light bouncing up into my eyes. So I don't know how contrasty this is really working. Whether the contrast is there enough. It looks okay. But I guess ultimately, you know better. You be the judge to see if it's working or not. I think I might leave it. If I could play it up a little bit more, but basically, I'm happy with how the forms are created and the shine, the likeness. I've lightened his eye a little bit. I think what I might do is just a touch, create, because I've lost a little bit of the curve of the iris over here. Hopefully the eyes have lined up. Anyway, that's Robert J. That's before, and that's after. So J. Robert Oppenheimer, and father of the atomic bomb. This is Frantz Kantor saying, I will catch you on the flip side. Bye-bye.